Wisp is one of the very best Warframes in the game and a community favorite, but shockingly, I haven't talked about her yet. So, in today's build guide, I cooked. In fact, I'm gonna show you how you can get millions of damage out of her, all while at the same time being completely untouchable even against the highest level enemies, and what's more, it's actually pretty comfy to play as well. Big shout out to all generous channel members who helped me keep the lights on, and now, let's jump right into it. And jumping into it we do with a breakdown of her skills, starting out with the passive, which sounds super amazing on paper, but as we're gonna realize, it's actually not all that important. Wisp's passive is that whenever you are in the air, you are invisible to enemies. This invisibility stays on for like half a second after you land, so if you continuously keep on jumping, you stay invisible. But if you stay on the ground for too long, or you start firing your weapon, even if it's mid-air, then the enemies will spot you instantly and start firing at you. As I said, sounds super cool, but we will see that in practice, we're pretty much not gonna have to use it at all. So let's jump into her 4 main skills. Number 1 is called Reservoirs, and what this does is you can cycle through 3 different reservoirs that you can pull down, and then they will provide you buffs either when you stand in their AoE, or you can also just walk through it and then they will stay with you for a couple of seconds so that you don't have to refresh them all that often. Each one of these reservoirs does a different thing. For example, the red one increases your maximum HP and also gives you constant health regeneration. The blue one zaps nearby enemies with electricity, stunning them for a little bit. And the green one is basically something like Volt's speed boost, giving you more movement speed, more casting speed for animations, making everything faster that is related to your physical movement. Ideally, you want to have all these 3 buffs up constantly. Now, there is also an augment which changes the skill in a way that instead of having 3 separate reservoirs, you get 1 big reservoir which gives you all those 3 things at the same time, so you don't have to cycle through. But if you ask me, while this is convenient, it also costs 1 mod slot to put this in, and I personally think it's not worth it, so we're not gonna use it today. Wisp's 2 goes by the name Will-O-Wisp. This one is actually pretty simple. You throw out a decoy that moves forward and all the enemy attention will instantly be drawn to it. I mean, let's be real here, we all know what they're looking at, right? So yeah, pretty similar to Loki's decoy here. However, there is one big difference here, and this is actually super amazing for survivability, and that is, if you tap the button again while your decoy is still on the field, you teleport to the decoy's current position, and after that teleport, you will be invincible for 3 full seconds. It's kinda like rolling guard in that in these 3 seconds, absolutely nothing can happen to you. So keep it on the radar for now. Ability number 3 goes by the name Breach Surge, and this is crazy strong and also the reason why Wisp is able to deal tens of millions, sometimes even over 100 million damage. So let's go and talk about what it does. First of all, when you cast Breach Surge, you will shoot out those so-called surge sparks that will home in on nearby enemies and blind them. That's already nice because blinded enemies can't attack you. However, when you hit enemies that are affected by this blind, every time they take damage, there is a 10% chance that they will shoot out another one of these surge sparks that will home in on nearby enemies and deal damage. And then as well, when the enemy dies, there is a guaranteed surge spark coming out. Now, the reason this is so super strong comes down to how the damage that these surge sparks deal when they hit enemies is calculated. At base, the damage of the surge spark is as high as the damage that the enemy took before dying. However, that's just the beginning, because at base, Breach Surge takes this damage and multiplies it with a base ×2 multiplier, which is already crazy, but it can be further increased with more ability strength. And as if that's not enough, Breach Surge also has a 100% crit chance, so that these surge sparks always have a guaranteed yellow crit with an additional 1.5 times critical multiplier, meaning that in total, it takes the damage that you dealt to the enemy, multiplies it with the Breach Surge multiplier, then multiplies that by another 1.5 times, and as you can see, the damage ramps up so crazy that you easily get in the tens of millions of damage with these surge sparks. Now, Breach Surge also has an augment, but this is only useful if you use Breach Surge to teleport to some of your reservoirs, and while it is cool, I personally find that this is kind of a bit finicky to play, so if you want to, definitely try it out, but on today's builds, we're not gonna use it. And finally, Wisp's 4 is called Soul Gate, where she creates a portal to the sun and shoots out a fat laser beam to deal damage to enemies. Long story short, this sounds extremely awesome, but it is actually not really good. This is going to be our helmet slot, we're also not going to use it. And if you personally like the idea of shooting out a big ray that deals tons of damage, then my recommendation would be play Corvex instead, because he has a skill that works very similar, just that it's actually strong. But alright, so much for the skills, let's now actually talk about how to play Wisp in practice. First off, when you get into the mission, the first thing you want to do is place down all your 3 reservoirs to get your buffs up and to also be able to keep those buffs constantly. Then in combat, try to spam your Breach Surge as much as possible, because not only do these Surge Sparks help you deal more damage and more AoE damage in total, but also they do blind enemies and therefore make sure that there is less incoming damage towards you so that the enemies are always kept in check. In case you take a big hit or your shields go down to 0, that's when you quickly want to use your second skill in the way that you quickly double tap the 2 key, because remember, tapping it once creates the clone and tapping it twice teleports you to the position of the clone, meaning if you double tap it, you basically stay in position but you still get the 3 seconds of invulnerability from teleporting to the clone's location. This all in all is going to be our main source of survivability because it's super easy to do, has no casting time or animation at all. You just quickly double tap the button and bam, you have 3 seconds of invincibility. It's kind of like rolling guard, just that it doesn't have any cooldown and you can spam the living heck out of it if you really need to. And just by the way, if you could maybe deal millions of damage to that like button, then I would be super happy because it helps big time with the YouTube algorithm, so cheers so much for your support. But now, let's actually take a look at how to build Wisp. Okay, the build. Now, the first thing I need to say here is that today's build does have quite some synergies between Wisp, her weapons, and her companion. So I strongly encourage to not just skip through it, because if you simply copy-paste the mods, it might not actually work out the way it's supposed to. But now, with that being said, let's first talk about survivability, because even though you get 3 seconds of invulnerability with your second skill, there is a problem with that. See, while shield gating gives you that brief invincibility time frame that gives you enough time to cast your second skill, after your 3-second invulnerability period is over, your shields most likely won't have fully recharged, meaning when you then take the next damage instance, that's most likely going to kill you instantly without being able to react in time. How we're gonna solve that? Well, relatively simple. We use catalyzing shields because what this does is it massively reduces our maximum shields, aka making it that they recharge to full much faster, and it ensures that every time if the shields were full, we get 1.3 seconds of invulnerability, which is enough time to then cast our second skill to get the next 3-second invulnerability period. How do we ensure that this little shield then will at least be full after the 3 seconds end? Well, usually we would use Brief Respite in the aura, so casting our second ability would automatically max out the shields instantly, but unfortunately with Wisp we can't do that because we actually need to take a different aura mod later on, so what we need to do here is have at least 4 different augur mods somewhere in our setup, because remember, the set bonus of the augur mod set also does the same thing as Brief Respite, and with 4 augur mods we're gonna have enough energy to shield conversion so that our shields are going to be maxed out by simply pressing the 2 button. Don't worry, you're going to see where those augur mods are in just a second. So yeah, when it comes to survivability, we're going to make it pretty simple. You know, when our shield breaks, we quickly double tap the second skill. That will then fill our shields back up to full again, and when the 3 seconds end, we can simply rinse and repeat the entire process as long as we want, therefore staying completely invincible all the time. Next, before we take a look at the mods, let's look at the Archon shards because I want to get that out of the way first. And here we're pretty straightforward. We have 2 yellow shards for more casting speed. Because Wisp is kind of a skill spammy Warframe, you want to make sure to get those skills out fast and not be stuck in the casting animation for too long. And then in addition, I went with 3 reds for more ability strength, just to make sure that those surge sparks hit home even more with the crazy damage. But so much for that, let's now take a look at which mods you want to use on your Wisp. First of all, we need to talk about the Excellus slot, where I personally would recommend Primed Sure-Footed because of the fact that we get constant invulnerability by spamming our second skill if we have to. The only thing that can really kill us is if we get knocked down and then killed while we're laying on the ground. And by the way, in case you don't have Prime Sure-Footed yet, that's not a big deal. In that case, just go with Handspring. It's not as good, but it at least helps you get back on your feet much faster. Next, let's talk about the Aura mod and the reason why we cannot go and use Brief Respite here. And that is because in the Aura, we're gonna use Combat Discipline. What this one does is, whenever you kill an enemy, you're gonna take a little bit of damage yourself. Why do we want to damage ourselves? Well, it's pretty simple, because as one of our arcanes, we're going to use Arcane Avenger, which gives you a huge crit boost, but in order to trigger, you need to take damage. So yeah, so much about your survivability and the Aura mod slot. Next, we want to make sure that we amp up the damage of our Surge Sparks as much as possible by doubling down into a ton of ability strength, and that happens with Blind Rage, Mold Augmented in the second Arcane slot, Augur Secrets, that would be the first of our 4 Augur mods that we talked about earlier, and then Archon Intensify, because it gives you even more ability strength if you heal yourself with an ability, which remember, Wisp has constant heal with her first skill, so that's not a problem, therefore capping out at more ability strength than Umbral Intensify. Then we go for Prime Continuity to have a bit more ability duration, as well as Augur Reach to increase the range of those Surge Sparks a little bit. You could go for Stretch here, giving you even more range, but remember, we have to have a total of 4 Augur mods in order to regain enough shields, so instead of Stretch, we are forced to go with Augur Reach. And then finally, because with Wisp we spam so many skills and Blind Rage reducing our efficiency on top of that, we need to make sure that we have big time energy economy going on, and that is what we ensure with Equilibrium as well as Flow, or if you have, you can also go for Primed Flow. So, these would be the mods for Wisp herself, but in order to increase the damage of our Surge Sparks even more, we also have to take a look at our Helmet Subsumability. As I said in the skill section, our 4th skill, Soul Gate, doesn't really help with this build, so this is the one that we're going to replace with something else from the helmet. And in general, which helmet skill you use here is pretty much up to personal preference. It's not like she's forced to have a certain thing here. But if you want to get the maximum damage, then my personal recommendation would be going for Roar, because, you know, Roar being a universal faction damage bonus, that also applies to skills. This will massively increase the damage output, not only of the shot that creates the Surge Spark, but also after that, the Surge Spark itself. This right here would be the full premium quote-unquote build for my Wisp. This here is the more budget version of it, in case you don't want to invest all that much. Still works great though, but for this whole setup to work in the first place, we need to have a very specific combination of weapons, so let's talk about that next. Now, when we're talking about Wisp and weapon selection, the one thing that you need to keep in mind is that in order to make sure that your Surge Sparks deal as much damage as possible, you want to deal as much damage as possible in one single hit to create the Surge Spark, meaning that Wisp in specific prefers weapons that deal single big hits instead of rapid-fire weapons that only deal a little bit of damage with every individual shot. So, all in all, if you play Wisp, stuff like, you know, the Tenet Arcaplasmor, the Natarok, the Kuva Brahma, all these heavy hitters are excellent primary weapons. However, in today's build, we're gonna use the Glaive Prime because I personally love this weapon. It deals crazy amounts of damage. It is currently available in the game to farm if you don't have it. And all in all, Wisp plus the Glaive Prime is a match made in heaven. So, let's take a look at what I cooked here. In order to deal a lot of damage in one hit, you throw it out, make it explode, dealing tons of damage in a big AoE. Remember how in the skill section I said that Breach Surge, you know, those Surge Sparks, have a guaranteed 100% chance to yellow crit? We will now go and use that mechanic to our advantage even further. See, with the revamped cold status effect, enemies that are affected by cold, or maybe even fully frozen, take even more crit damage from hits that, you know, are critical hits. In other words, on top of all the stacking damage that those Surge Sparks already have, if they hit an enemy that is frozen, that damage will be even higher because Surge Sparks all are considered critical hits. That's why, as a primary weapon, we're gonna use the Tenet Glaxion with this build right here that is solely focused on dealing as much cold status effects as possible, plus, and this is very important, the mod Shivering Contagion to spread those cold status effects even more, so you're able to pretty much insta-freeze the entire room just by firing this weapon for a second. Let's also take a look at my Glaive Prime build here, which is pretty standard all in all. However, there is one specific thing that I need to mention here, and that is the melee arcane that I use, that being Melee Crescendo. As you maybe know, what Melee Crescendo does is, whenever you get a finisher kill, it increases your minimum combo counter. Meaning you can get your combo counter so high permanently that you always have a certain combo multiplier, and that doesn't go down anymore at all. This is specifically great for glaive weapons because glaive throws count as heavy attacks, and with melees, if you do a heavy attack, that heavy attack damage is multiplied by your current combo multiplier. Just by the way, in case you don't have Melee Crescendo, just take this build and replace Gladiator Might with Corrupt Charge to at least have a constant 2x multiplier then. Now, the only problem is, in order to stack our combo multiplier so high, we do need to get finisher kills in the first place. So how we're gonna do that? Pretty simple. In our secondary weapon slot, we go for the Bronco with its special mod, Dizzying Rounds. What this does is, whenever you hit an enemy with the Bronco, the enemy is opened up to finishers. So what you basically gotta do at the beginning of the mission is jump into the enemies, hit a couple of them with the Bronco, and, weave in some finisher kills here and there to get the combo multiplier up, and that then will stay for the rest of the mission. If you ask me, I would aim my combo multiplier to get somewhere around 4x to 6x, but as you also see in the background right here, after a glaive throw, it takes a little bit of time for the combo multiplier to tick back up, so in day-to-day gameplay, you realistically won't really see multipliers higher than 6x because you throw the glaive so frequently. This right here would be my full Bronco build. However, do note that the only really important thing here is Dizzying Rounds plus the 2 Augur mods here, because remember, we need a total of 4 Augur mods for the shield recharge, and these here would be number 3 and 4. However, there is one last key element of this entire setup, and that will be our companion, about which we're gonna talk now. Okay, so, the companion. Of course, you are free to use whatever you like here. Our damage is already so high that it doesn't matter all that much. However, if you want to truly min-max this setup, then the best solution in my opinion here would be the Panzerwelpe Phyla, because it provides the best viral priming in the entire game with its skill Viral Quilts, meaning even bigger numbers for us. This right here would be my personal full build. However, not all of these mods here are essential. The ones that you really need are, of course, Viral Quilts for the viral priming, Panzer Devolution so that even if the Welpephyla dies, it can still continue with the viral priming, Synth Deconstruct to drop you more health orbs which then get turned into energy for you with your equilibrium, and then the combination of Bite and Tenacious Bond, because Bite ensures that the crit chance of your Welpephyla is higher than 50%, and Tenacious Bond makes that whenever the crit chance of your companion is higher than 50%, all your crit damage gets a final 1.2 times multiplier, meaning your glaive throws, your surge sparks, all of that is gonna get another 20% stronger. With this entire setup, as you also see in the background right now, you deal tens and tens of millions of damage, sometimes even in the hundreds, and everything absolutely melts, while at the same time enemy level is not really a concern, because if they hit you hard, you simply double tap your second skill, get your invulnerability, rinse and repeat. Nothing can touch you, while you keep on killing absolutely everything. And if you now also want to know all the details about the Glaive Prime that we used today, then don't miss out on my Glaive Prime build right here. Another big shout out to Niels V, Demon Lord Zell, Demon Emperor, Emperor Prime, Nostlinux Gaming, Lycan Shepherd, Turtle Beer, Pepperwolf, Ondakani02, Misfire DX, Streamjet21, SignUpKing 5000, Griplip Yixi, Mihawk HE, Yagis, and all other generous channel members for your continuous support. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, good loot!